The moment I pulled into my warehouse parking lot that morning, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just one or two cars in the wrong spot. It was a sea of vehicles, dozens of them, packed so tightly that there wasn't a single open space left. My heart pounded as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to process what I was seeing. My delivery trucks were lined up outside, unable to enter. My employees had nowhere to park. And there, right in front of me, was a group of strangers laughing, unloading groceries from their cars, chatting like they owned the place. My hands clenched. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a takeover. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve. Subscribe for more crazy stories like this. I slammed the car doors shut and stalked toward the warehouse entrance, my shoes crunching against the pavement. The closer I got, the clearer it became. These cars weren't abandoned. They belonged to residents of the nearby HOA community. My warehouse had always been private property, my hard-earned business. Yet these people had taken it upon themselves to turn it into their personal parking lot. No permission, no notice, nothing. I spotted a woman stepping out of a white SUV, adjusting her sunglasses as she slung a purse over her shoulder. She noticed me staring and had the audacity to smile. "Morning," she chirped, as if I were some friendly neighbor instead of the owner of the very property she was trespassing on. I didn't reply. My blood was boiling too much for small talk. Instead, I yanked my phone from my pocket and dialed Karen, my assistant. She picked up on the first ring. "Mark, are you seeing this?" Her voice was already laced with frustration. "The guys are calling me left and right. No one can park, and our delivery schedules are getting thrown off." "I see it," I said through clenched teeth. "Did someone authorize this? A special event or anything?" "No way," Karen replied. "We never gave permission to anyone. These aren't our people." I exhaled sharply, my jaw tightening as I turned back toward the lot. I could already tell this wasn't going to be an easy fix. "All right, I'll handle it," I muttered before hanging up. I stormed across the lot, past rows of sedans, SUVs, and minivans, their windshields reflecting the morning sun like a taunt. Many of them had stickers from the nearby HOA community, the same HOA that I had deliberately avoided dealing with when I bought this warehouse. I had picked this location because it was supposed to be independent, away from neighborhood drama and entitled suburban politics. Yet here I was, forced into a battle I never signed up for. I headed straight for the HOA office. It was a short walk from my warehouse, nestled inside a pristine community with perfectly trimmed hedges, spotless sidewalks, and a false sense of order. Everything about this place screamed control. As I stepped inside the community center, the receptionist barely glanced up from her computer before offering a sweet but robotic smile, as if she hadn't just been part of ruining my morning. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge," I said, my voice flat but firm. "There's a serious issue with my property." The receptionist tilted her head. "What kind of issue, sir?" "Your residents have taken over my private parking lot." I leaned forward, "and I need it cleared. Now." She blinked, clearly not expecting the confrontation. "Oh, let me check if Miss Langston is available." I crossed my arms, staring daggers into the glass partition behind her. The name was familiar. Karen Langston, the self-important HOA president I had only heard about in passing. A control freak, according to some. A nightmare, according to others. A few minutes later, I was led into her office, where she sat behind a polished oak desk, exuding the kind of arrogance that only came with too much power in too small a position. "Mr. Cruz," she greeted smoothly, barely looking up from the papers in front of her. "What can I do for you?" I didn't sit. I didn't waste time. "Your residents have turned my warehouse parking lot into their personal space. I want them out immediately." She finally looked at me then, a carefully neutral expression masking something far more condescending. "Oh, that," she said, as if I were complaining about a minor inconvenience instead of a complete violation of my property rights. "We had to find a solution. Parking is very limited in the neighborhood, and your lot was just sitting there and used most of the time. We figured it made sense. I stared at her, stunned. The sheer audacity. You figured, I echoed. You decided to use my property without asking. She sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. It's for the community's benefit. Surely, as a local business owner, you understand the importance of supporting the neighborhood. I took a slow breath, gripping the back of the chair in front of me to keep from flipping it over. My business is not part of your HOA. You don't get to make decisions for my property. Miss Langston folded her hands, her nails perfectly manicured, her expression stone-cold and unmoved. Mr. Cruz, I suggest you think carefully before escalating this. The HOA has resources. We're acting within reason. I leaned in, meeting her gaze without flinching. You have 48 hours to tell your people to move their cars. After that, I'm handling it myself. For the first time, her expression twitched, the smallest flicker of doubt. But then, just as quickly, she smirked. If you say so, Mr. Cruz. We'll see. I left her office seething, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. This wasn't just about parking. This was about power, control, and entitlement. She thought she could walk all over me. She had no idea who she was messing with. The next morning, I pulled into my warehouse lot, half hoping that maybe, just maybe, the HOA had come to their senses and cleared the vehicles. But the moment I turned onto the property, that hope shattered. If anything, the situation was worse. There were even more cars now, some parked so recklessly that they blocked access to the loading docks entirely. My delivery trucks were backed up onto the street, drivers standing outside, shaking their heads in frustration. My employees were forced to park blocks away and walk, already grumbling about the growing inconvenience. And the worst part, the HOA residents acted like they belonged here. A man in a polo shirt strolled across my lot, sipping coffee like it was his personal driveway. A woman loaded grocery bags into her trunk without a second thought. No one had even tried to reach out. No effort had been made to fix this. It was clear now. They were ignoring my warning entirely. I clenched my jaw, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Fine. If they wanted to play this game, they had no idea what was coming. I stepped out, phone in hand, snapping photos of every vehicle, license plates, parking positions, the way they obstructed my business operations. Every detail documented. If they thought they could just brush this off, they were dead wrong. I made sure to take wide shots of the entire lot, capturing just how out of control the situation had become. The moment I finished, I dialed my lawyer. Jacob, it's happening. The HOA ignored my warning, and now my lot looks like a public parking garage. I need to know my options. Jacob let out a low sigh on the other end. Did you put up signs? I will today, I replied, and I have all the photos and records. Good, he said. Post those signs immediately. Give them a final warning. Document everything, and if they still refuse to move, you're fully within your rights to tow. But make sure you cover every legal step. HOA types love to twist things in their favor. Don't worry, I muttered, already walking toward my office. I'll handle it. Karen was waiting for me just inside, arms crossed, her expression mirroring my frustration. They didn't move a single car, did they? She asked, already knowing the answer. I shook my head. Nope. More of them showed up, she huffed. Unbelievable. I overheard some of the employees complaining. A few are already talking about looking for other jobs if they have to deal with this nonsense every day. My irritation spiked further. That's not going to happen. We're ending this. Without another word, I grabbed a stack of newly printed no parking. Private property. Violators will be towed at owner's expense signs from my office and marched outside. One by one, I bolted them onto the fences, placed them at every entrance, and even put a few right in the middle of the lot where they couldn't be ignored. Each time I hammered one into place, It felt like slamming the final nail in the HOA's coffin. Residents passed by as I worked, some staring in curiosity, others pretending not to notice. A man in a suit actually had the gall to smirk at me as he walked toward his car. I knew that look. It was a look of someone who believed I was powerless to stop him. He had no idea how wrong he was. Once the last sign was in place, I took photos of each one, making sure I had evidence in case the HOA tried to claim ignorance. Then, for good measure, I sent a formal notice to Miss Langston. The email was short, direct, and left no room for argument. Miss Langston, your residents continue to trespass on my property despite my warnings. As of this moment, no parking signs have been installed, and this serves as your final notice. You have 24 hours to notify your community and clear all unauthorized vehicles. Any car still on my lot after the deadline will be towed at the owner's expense. I have documented every step and will enforce my property rights accordingly. Consider this your last chance. Mark Cruz. I hit send and sat back, exhaling slowly. There. She had no excuse now. If she refused to act, that was on her. I went through my call list next, reaching out to a towing company I had researched the night before. The moment they picked up, I laid out the situation. This is private property, and they're parked here illegally. I have all the documentation, legal notices, and signage in place. The dispatcher on the other end confirmed they had experienced handling HOA disputes before. We'll send trucks out tomorrow morning. Just make sure you have the paperwork ready. Oh, I will, I assured her. That evening, I stayed late at the warehouse, watching the lot, waiting to see if the HOA would make a move. But they didn't. Cars came and went, residents treating my property like some free parking benefit they were entitled to. No one removed their vehicle. No one acted like they even noticed the signs I had spent all day putting up. It was infuriating, but at the same time, it solidified my decision. The HOA thought they could push me around. They thought their little bubble of control extended beyond their community. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, the tow trucks would arrive, and the fun would really begin. The sun had barely begun to rise when I arrived at my warehouse the next morning, but the lot was just as packed as ever. The same entitled HOA residents, the same careless parking jobs blocking my docks, the same smug sense of ownership radiating from people who had absolutely no right to be here. But today wasn't just another frustrating morning. Today was the day everything changed. I leaned against my car, arms crossed, watching as the first tow truck rumbled into the lot, followed by another and then another, their presence a clear declaration of war. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a call from an unknown number, but I already knew exactly who it was. Smirking, I declined the call and turned my attention back to the lot. Let them try to stop this. They had their chance. Now it was my turn. The drivers wasted no time. They got to work immediately, hooking up cars one after another, the sounds of chains clanking and hydraulic lifts humming through the air. The first SUV was hoisted up before its owner even realized what was happening. A man in a bathrobe and slippers came running out of the HOA neighborhood, his coffee sloshing over the edge of his mug as he waved his arms frantically. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, storming toward me like I was the criminal here. I didn't bother moving from my spot. "Clearing out trespassers," I said simply. "Your HOA had plenty of time to warn you. They chose not to. Not my problem." His face turned red as he spun toward the tow truck operator. "Put my car down. You can't do this." The driver barely glanced at him as he secured the last strap. "Talk to the property owner," he said, jerking a thumb in my direction before climbing into the truck and pulling away, leaving the man gaping in disbelief as his SUV disappeared down the street. The reaction was instant. As more people realized what was happening, the HOA neighborhood erupted in chaos. Residents poured into the lot, some still in pajamas, others dressed for work, all demanding answers as their cars were methodically towed one by one. A woman shrieked as she sprinted toward a tow truck, banging on the window as her car was lifted onto the flatbed. "You can't just take my car," she screamed. I pulled a stack of flyers from my pocket, the ones I had printed the night before with the towing company's contact information. Without a word, I handed one to her. "Your car isn't stolen. It's at the impound lot. Call the number, pay the fee, and you'll get it back." She snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're going to regret this." I laughed. Actually laughed. "No, I really won't." More tow trucks arrived, their drivers working like a well-oiled machine. By mid-morning, more than half the lot was cleared, leaving behind only the confused, angry residents who still hadn't grasped the reality of the situation. Some of them were on their phones, probably trying to call the police, their voices frantic as they exaggerated the situation in the hopes of making me look like the bad guy. I welcomed it. I had followed every legal step, documented every violation, and given more than enough warnings. There wasn't a single thing they could do to stop this. And right on cue, flashing red and blue lights appeared at the entrance of the lot, a police cruiser rolling up just as the last few cars were being hooked to the tow trucks. I turned to greet them as they stepped out, already prepared for this exact moment. "Sir, we got reports of unauthorized towing happening here," one of the officers said, his voice calm but firm. Before the HOA residents could try and twist the story, I pulled out my paperwork and handed it over. "Everything is authorized. This is my private property. I have photos, documentation, legal notices, and every single one of these cars was warned in advance. The HOA president was notified days ago and did nothing. I've covered my bases." The officer took his time reading through everything, his partner flipping through the photos I had taken. The crowd of HOA residents watched, some hopeful that I'd be arrested, others still yelling about how unfair this was. But when the officer finally looked up, he gave a nod. "Looks like you're in the clear," he said, handing me back my documents. Then he turned to the residents, his expression blank. "He's within his rights. If your car was towed, you'll need to contact the impound lot." The explosion of outrage was immediate. The residents couldn't believe it, yelling over each other, demanding to know how this was allowed to happen. One woman was practically sobbing, her mascara running down her face as she waved her phone in the officer's face. "But we live here. We were told we could park here. How is this legal?" The officer shrugged. "Whoever told you that was wrong. This isn't HOA property. He owns the lot." I watched as realization started to sink in. The residents weren't just angry anymore. They were confused. Because now, the truth was unavoidable. Someone had lied to them. That's when she arrived. Miss Langston stormed into the lot, like she was walking into a battlefield, her face red with barely contained fury. She zeroed in on me immediately, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she closed the distance between us. "Mr. Cruz, this is absolutely unacceptable," she snapped. "You had no right to do this." I crossed my arms, unbothered. I had every right. You ignored my warnings. This is on you. Her nostrils flared. The HOA will not stand for this. You've disrupted the entire community. You'll be facing serious consequences for this. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what exactly do you plan to do? Sue me? For enforcing my property rights? Good luck with that." She was fuming, but she had nothing. No counter. No argument. Just empty threats and an audience of furious residents who were now looking at her with something dangerously close to betrayal. They had trusted her, followed her authority, and now they were realizing she had led them straight into a disaster. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she turned to the crowd, lifting her hands in an attempt to salvage control. "Everyone, please remain calm. We'll sort this out." "Sort this out." A man cut her off, stepping forward with a glare. "You told us this was fine, that we could park here, and now we have to pay to get our cars back." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone else shouted, "Are you going to cover the fees, then?" The air shifted. The anger that had been solely directed at me was now spreading, turning inward toward the very person who had started this mess in the first place. I could see it happening, the moment the power she thought she had began slipping through her fingers. And I smiled, because this was just the beginning. The fallout from the towing operation was nothing short of spectacular. By the time the last tow truck rolled away, the HOA residents were left standing in the lot, a mix of disbelief, fury, and sheer embarrassment written all over their faces. Some of them still clutched the flyers I had given them. Others had their phones pressed to their ears, no doubt calling the impound lot to figure out how much they'd have to pay to get their vehicles back. But the best part? The way the entire mess was no longer my problem. It had shifted, turning inward, and at the center of it all stood Miss Langston, now facing a growing wave of outrage from the very people she had deceived. I watched as residents surrounded her, voices rising, accusations being hurled with every passing second. "You said this was fine," a man snapped, waving his impound receipt in her face. "You told us it was handled." Another woman, arms crossed tightly over her chest, glared at her with barely contained anger. "Are you seriously going to pay for all this, Karen? Because I'm not wasting my money because of your stupidity." More voices joined in, the crowd growing restless, shifting like a storm on the verge of breaking. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, Miss Langston wasn't in control. Her confidence, that smug, dismissive attitude, was cracking. I leaned against my car, arms crossed, taking in the spectacle. It was almost too perfect. The very people who had blindly followed her, believing in her so-called authority, were now realizing she had led them straight into a disaster. I could see it on her face, the way she was trying to think of something, anything, to salvage her position. But there was no way out of this one. She had overstepped. She had ignored my warnings, and now she was reaping the consequences. I decided to push things just a little further. Stepping forward, I let my voice carry over the angry crowd. "Seems like your president didn't tell you everything," I said, loud enough that nearly everyone turned to look at me. I gestured to the freshly installed no parking signs still standing tall around the lot. "These went up days ago. Your HOA was notified. You had plenty of warnings, but instead of handling it, your dear leader here decided to pretend none of it mattered. And now, all of you are paying for it." That was the final nail in the coffin. If the crowd had been simmering before, now they were outright boiling. "You knew about this," someone shouted at Miss Langston. "And you didn't say anything?" Another man shook his head in disgust. "All because you didn't want to admit you were wrong." The anger that had been aimed at me had officially been redirected. Miss Langston took a step back, face paling as she realized she had lost control. She opened her mouth, probably to come up with some excuse, some desperate attempt to shift the blame. But the crowd wasn't having it. The residents had turned on her completely, and it was clear there was no coming back from this. I watched as she stumbled through some weak defense about acting in the best interest of the community, but it was drowned out by the sheer number of people demanding answers, demanding compensation, demanding consequences. Deciding I had seen enough, I shook my head, giving Karen a nod before turning on my heel and heading back toward the warehouse. I had a business to run, and as satisfying as it was to see the HOA finally crash and burn, I wasn't about to waste another second on them. As I stepped inside, Karen was already waiting for me, arms crossed as she peeked out the window at the absolute circus unfolding outside. "Well," she said, her tone amused. "That went even better than I expected." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Told you. Give people enough rope and they'll hang themselves." She smirked. "So, what now? Think they'll actually try to fight this? Or is the HOA done for?" I considered it for a moment, then shrugged. "Doesn't matter. If they try anything else, I've got all the documentation to shut it down before it even starts." And just like that, life returned to normal. The lot was finally empty. free of the constant invasion of cars that had plagued it for weeks. Employees were able to park without hassle. Deliveries were back on track, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on running my business without dealing with entitled HOA nonsense. But the story didn't quite end there. A few days later, a letter arrived at my office, an official notice from the HOA. I sighed, bracing myself for yet another empty threat, but as I read through it, my eyebrows lifted in surprise. It wasn't a threat at all. It was an apology, a formal, signed statement from the HOA board acknowledging that they had overstepped, that they had misled their residents, and that moving forward, they would ensure no such thing happened again. And at the bottom, a small but significant detail: Miss Langston had resigned. I sat back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. That was unexpected. I had assumed she'd fight tooth and nail to keep her position, to cling to the last shreds of authority she had left. But it seemed even she had realized there was no coming back from this. Her reign was over. I tossed the letter onto my desk, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction settle in. It had taken time, patience, and a whole lot of legal paperwork, but in the end, justice had won. And as I stepped outside that evening, looking out at the now peaceful, empty lot, I knew one thing for sure: no one was ever going to mess with my property again.